Welcome to this online event. Solace is marking the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence today, and we have a very interesting event that we are bringing to you. We've got colleagues here from the vulg sector, experts of experience, educators, looking at the very serious issue of peer-on-peer abuse in school, so including physical, emotional, sexual abuse and harassment. Um, Solace are the second biggest service provider in terms of domestic abuse services in the country, and we split our services into prevention, intervention, and recovery-based services. So we're really pleased to be able to share this work with you. We're also launching our educational films that have been created by our Solace Young Changemakers. And there's a series of practical resources that our chair Yvonne can tell you a little bit more about. Welcome to Yvonne Roberts, who is our chair for today's event. Yvonne has just recently joined Solace as a charity ambassador, and we're delighted with her coming on board and joining our wonderful organisation. I'm gonna hand over now to Jude, who's the director of Rank and Pod Theatre. Thank you, Jude, for your the huge amount of experience you have in this area and giving a voice to underrepresented groups. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nahar, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here with Solace today for 16 Days of Activism. Yes, we've had the pleasure of working with the Young Changemaker group over a number of years, and this particular project, working with the Mulberry Academy Woodside, was I'd like to say it was an absolute privilege to work with a group of young people with experience around all aspects of peer-on-peer abuse, and in such a supportive school where we were able to work with those young people to design quite a proactive message of change, albeit they are young change makers, and the work they made was I hope you find very directional in terms of calling out what peer-on-peer abuse is through their lens, but then framing how young people can reframe what peer-on-peer abuse is and expect something different and not feel some of that pressure perhaps that they had previously experienced in isolation to stay quiet. So that involved online abuse, sexual assault, inappropriate touching, all sorts of different aspects of as you will see in the film, of online abuse and of peer-on-peer. So I hope that I believe that the young people's voices will really come through today, and I hope you enjoy the films.
As a young changemaker, what I've learned for whoever is getting bullied or struggling right now, I would say honestly, don't find comfort in other people, find comfort in yourself. You can never be anyone else, you are yourself. So instead of trying to diminish and break yourself apart and be like, oh, I'm this or I'm that, no, you're great. So let's be clear. Peer-on-peer abuse is wrong. Together, we can change it.
Online abuse can make you feel isolated. It can also damage your self-esteem in everyday life, friends and family. It could damage school life as well. As a young change maker, I would say social media does not define you, you define you. Report it, block it, make it stop.
As a young person, you might feel very paranoid and closed to yourself because of what's happened to you. You've experienced trauma in your past. So you might want to tell one of your friends or some of your friends that you trust about how you feel and the issues that you've dealt with the person. And you might also want to tell a parent or a teacher or a guardian that you feel a certain way about it and they could deal with that. You have the power, use it.
If you're sent explicit content, you might feel as if you don't have enough confidence to maybe go out in public, talk to new people. You have to understand that it's not your fault, and you don't always need to interact with people that make you feel as if it is your fault, and you don't always need to react to what you are sent. I encourage you to speak to a trusted adult because you will be believed. Change your mindset. There's a bigger picture. If you're a victim of sexual assault, you may feel as if you are not worthy, you feel like you have low self-esteem, you have low confidence, and you feel like you might want to isolate yourself from other people around you. As a young change maker, I would encourage you to speak to a trusted adult, or at least speak to your friends so that they can offer you some support. You're not alone, and you can seek mental support, legal support and physical support to help you get through what you're going through. If you think something's wrong, you're probably right. Change it.
So you might feel ashamed of yourself, low self-esteem, and not even a bit of confidence in yourself because of what happens. But don't worry, because you shouldn't let the past make you feel or define the person that you are right now. As a young change maker, I believe that you guys should first of all stay out of danger, like make sure you're safe, and make sure before you do anything, think about it, make sure it's the right thing to do. Sexual harassment is never your fault. The abuser is the loser, never you, so change it.
Hello, my name's Yvonne Roberts, and I'm a journalist and novelist, and now very proud to be an ambassador for Solace. That's the second time I've seen that film, and one, I'm horrified by the statistics, and two, I just think the Changemakers are absolutely brilliant. I mean, they're just so eloquent. And we've got a terrific panel here this afternoon who will go into more detail into how young people can be helped in terms of prevention and dealing with the aftermath of peer-on-peer abuse. But they were just so eloquent. I just love the fact that you have the power, use it, and it seemed to come straight from the heart. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and each person is going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take question and answers, and I'll have a few follow-up questions as well. So we have Ellie Softly, who's Head of Education at Everyone's Invited. It's a terrific charity that uses powerful personal testimonies to challenge the normalization of rape culture. And I think it opened the door really to so many people to share their experiences in a way they never had the opportunity before. From the NSPCC, we have Lucy Topham, who's part of the Lighthouse team that's helping children to recover and rebuild their lives after sexual abuse. Laura Sanford is Deputy Head of Mulberry Academy Woodside, which is where those lovely Changemakers came from. And she's also the school's delegated safeguarding lead. Lastly, we have Sasha Onyango, who's Head of Solace's Children and Young People Services, and that does great work offering early intervention, trauma-informed support and advocacy. So if we could kick off, please, with Ellie, and if you'd be kind enough to try and stick to your 5 minutes, that would be even better. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks, Yvonne.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ellie Softly. I'm the head of education and one of the founding members of Everyone's Invited. Everyone's Invited is a charity whose mission is to expose and eradicate rape culture with compassion, empathy, and understanding. But we started as a grassroots movement online. I've worked in the sector for about 8 years now. So as soon as I left school, I got involved in working in sexual violence prevention. And truly it came out of watching so many of my friends during my time at school be victims of violence, but also watching how normalized sexual violence and sexual harassment was growing up at school, really, and kind of looking from the age of 11 upwards, seeing all the different ways in which, rape and sexual violence was trivialized, turned into jokes, and the gendered expectations that we were expected to kind of fit into. And really, I got to 18 and I kind of pieced the puzzle together and I thought, hang on a second, this something isn't right. And it really made me realize that we are living in what we call a rape culture, which is the fact in the whole of society at structural levels and on small levels. We have a culture that accepts and actually a lot of the time turns a blind eye to rape and sexual violence. And Soma, our founder, she essentially in the summer of 2020 shared her experience of sexual violence during her time at school. So kind of came to a similar realization that I did at the same time, and looked back on all of her experiences and realized that actually it had been happening right in front of her. And not only had it been happening to her and her friends, but also she had been part of, contributing to that wider issue. So in the summer of 2020, she shared her story on her Instagram account and her experiences. And she started getting hundreds of people messaging her, sharing their stories and asking her to repost them. By the end of that month, it was thousands. And so she decided to set up a website where young people could, actually any age, we had submissions from 8 all the way up to 98. But predominantly people were talking about their experiences at school, and they could name the school that they were at when it happened. And in March of 2021, it just absolutely exploded all over national news. We had 50,000 testimonies on our website, spoken about in government, in national news networks, and thankfully prompted an investigation by Ofsted into sexual abuse in schools, which essentially just proved what all of the stories were saying, that sexual abuse in schools is rife and child-on-child abuse is rife. And we've definitely in the last kind of year or two seen an increase in child-on-child abuse, which is, it's great that we're seeing that increase because it means that the reporting is happening, but actually there's something else that's happening behind the scenes. And I've run our education program now we're in our 3rd year. We've worked with over 100 schools, but I've specialized in the rise in online misogyny. So I go into schools and I work with a lot of young men in particular to combat that rise of kind of negative influences, and specialize in understanding how a kind of fringe movement from the far right that kind of predominantly existed in America has now transgressed and moved into the UK schools. And actually I spend a lot of my time working on how we can combat that and really bridge a divide that we have between a lot of young men and women in schools across the UK right now. So that's what I do, and that's what we are.
Thank you very much, Ellie. It's really tragic that online misogyny now has become so much a rite of growing up for young girls. It really is. We now have Lucy from the NSPCC's Lighthouse team, please.
Hi, yes. So yeah, my name's Lucy. I am a children's services practitioner for the Letting the Future In therapeutic intervention based at the Lighthouse in Camden. Since the session has opened, I can see that my colleagues Bex and Luke have also joined as well. We sort of work collaboratively, but obviously we work with we work in different areas. So I typically work with the harmed child. So when there is a referral that comes to me to provide therapeutic support to a child who has shared that they've gone through sexual abuse or violence. Bex, Luke, I don't know if you want to just take this moment to introduce yourselves quickly.
Sure, thanks Lucy. Hi, I'm Bex Darby and I'm a team manager in two teams that very closely overlap. So long term, I've been team manager of a multidisciplinary harmful sexual behaviour service. So we work with mostly young men, but not all young men, also, young women up to the age of 21 who have displayed harmful sexual behaviour towards others. And more recently, the last 18 months or so, we've focused in especially on sibling sexual harm and abuse between siblings, and working with the whole family in that response. And Luke?
So my name's Luke Burridge. I am a social worker / children's service practitioner in the NCATS team and now the sibling service, and was a social worker in Islington for 5 years previous to coming here. I'm 2 years here, and I'd say 98% of the cases I had included domestic violence in one form or another, whether it was live domestic violence or historic within a family, intergenerational. I mean, it just seems to very sadly be the kind of underpinning issues for an awful lot of cases that come into social care, and worked with both victims of domestic violence, obviously the children, and also attempted to work with men who've perpetrated domestic violence, which gave me a unique insight into how challenging that particular work is and how bad the systems are around the victim.
And in the referrals that my team specifically receive in Letting the Future In, it's young people from the ages of 14 up to 17 who have experienced sexual abuse. Typically it can take lots of different forms, but we are increasingly seeing more and more peer-on-peer abuse that seems to be happening within schools, within communities, and it's taking on lots of different forms. A child I'm working with at the moment, it was all sexual abuse that she experienced online, so she never experienced kind of in-person sexual abuse, and sort of working with her around the struggles around her feeling like she's able to validate her experience around that and being able to name that experience as abuse. And typically in the work that we do in Letting the Future In, it's often we kind of hit the same markers with all the young people we work with, regardless of their experiences, such as things around self-esteem, understanding the impact of trauma, how these experiences can kind of manifest physically into their behaviors or the way that they act and interact with their peers, with their family, and the strained relationships that can often be caused from something like this. So often that is with families, with parents, with siblings as well, and how it can really, how these experiences of abuse, varying from kind of sexual harassment right up to rape, can all have such a devastating impact on the wider family as well, and how the child kind of feels within their own community, and that the way that they feel it might have impacted upon the way they are perceived by their family, the way that they're perceived in school. We do a lot of work with sort of trying our best to sort of educate professionals that we work with around how these children can exhibit certain behaviours and how we can best support them as well. In the lighthouse where we work, there is a CAMS team as well that we work quite closely with. And then they can kind of support around if certain mental health issues or concerns have kind of escalated, and we can work collaboratively with them, which is really, really good. But it's definitely been a very interesting process, sort of coming together with the NCATS team to create our sibling sexual harm service, because it's sort of bringing together the skills of both teams, and also the levels of experience from each team, kind of bringing that together, and trying to sort of think of it as a whole family approach when you're thinking of both the person who is harmed and the person who has been harmed as well. It's brought its challenges as well, but it's been very, very interesting.
The scale of what's required is just enormous, but it's very good that people are now. I mean, I've read certainly in the past about sibling abuse, and now it suddenly seems to be much more widely recognised, which is a step forward. Next, we have Laura. Laura is Deputy Head of Mulberry Academy Woodside, and I was going to say was responsible for the Changemakers, but not responsible. But you encouraged the Changemakers to do that terrific film.
Yeah, they're absolutely responsible for themselves. They're great young people. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. As Yvonne said, I'm Laura Sanford. I'm currently designated safeguarding lead and deputy head teacher at Mulberry Academy Woodside, which is in North London. But I've been in education for 20 years and very much in the heart of pastoral care. My first role after being an English teacher was to be a head of year. And when I was thinking back about this journey and the journey that I've been on, I was thinking about the sort of seismic shift that I've seen over the last 20 years as a person working in pastoral care and education. And it's so sad, as we said earlier on, to see those statistics and to know that we have to be having these conversations. And you know, thinking about the traumatic effect that it has on young people. But I'm also really pleased that it's now at the centre of conversations around safeguarding of young children in schools, and that we understand how important schools are in ensuring that young people feel safe and can learn in a safe and supportive environment. It's such an important place in children's lives. Schools are in a unique position, aren't we? Because we spend a lot of time with our young people at a very important developmental time in their lives. And it's so important, it's crucial that the education is right. I've been working with Tender, Tender's safeguarding trustee as well. I've been doing that for the last few years and thinking about some of the work that they do in schools to ensure that relationship education is good. And some of the things that I've noticed as a trustee is just the differences in experiences that young people might get in schools across the country, and the need to really have a centralized approach to education relationships so that we know that our young people are getting the same experience regardless of which school they're going to. Lots of the work that I do as a safeguarding lead is around creating a culture, and creating that culture where young people feel that they can be listened to about anything. But in particular around peer-on-peer abuse, we are working with lots of different groups. So we're working with teachers and helping our teachers to recognise. And, you know, like I said, some people are new into the profession, but some people might be like me and been working in it for a long time, and they need to be able to have their boundary and their levels re-educated and recalibrated regularly, and coming to our teachers so that they challenge their own perceptions of what peer-on-peer abuse is, and having that real understanding and that it can happen here, and not any kind of complacency that you know, that we're in a school or in an environment where it doesn't happen, always thinking this could happen here, and being very vigilant, having a culture of vigilance. We then need to work with our parents and carers too, because, you know, we work with them, and without having our parents and carers on board and they're having an understanding as well, the work is really difficult. So we try to make sure that we run workshops and we give lots of different opportunities to talk to our parents and carers, not just in a responsive way, but in a proactive way as well, to try and help them to understand some of the challenges that their children are facing. And if we can get that right, if we can get the support of the teachers and the parents and carers right, then we're going to provide that environment where the young people can really feel safe to explore what these things mean and what these things mean to them. They've got so many more challenges than I had as a young person. And we talked earlier on about not only the things that happen in school, but lots of the work that I deal with. And I would say, on a regular basis, young people come to talk to me about what's happening online, and that, you know, is a topic that is very hot in education at the minute, and, you know, in the country's government and political agenda. But for schools, we're really trying to unpick how to keep children safe online. And as a safeguarding lead, that's the area often that I feel where young people are most vulnerable, where they're consuming things on their own online without other people around. So that's, you know, another challenge. I've been really lucky to work with some fantastic people, and Solace being one of those organisations that is coming into schools to support us, because although I said I've been, you know, in pastoral care for a long time, I came into the job teaching sonnets, and actually that's not my area of expertise. And I'm very lucky to be able to work with all of these excellent people that can help us to really understand what is happening in our communities and in our schools. We have done work with Solace and Tender, and then more recently we've been doing some work with Jeffrey Boakye around reimagining masculinity, and just conversations with our young people about what it means to be male and what it means to be masculine, and helping them as well to explore questions and to explore their own identity. But it's a huge challenge, and so having time like this to be able to talk about it and work with us all together is really valuable. So thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Laura. I think collaboration is absolutely key, because it seems such an all-encompassing area that requires action. Sasha is head of Solace's Children and Young People Services, excellent Children and Young People Services. So over to you, Sasha.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for having me. As Yvonne said, I'm Sasha, and I'm head of our Children and Young People Services here at Solace, and I'm having more than 25 years of experience working in the field supporting children and young people across the borders, if I might say. Been working with Solace for the last 13 years, and literally I am here because I do believe in the work we do. I'm really privileged to work with fantastic staff members who are doing and making a massive difference on the ground. Obviously, a lot of our work that we are kind of like delivering for our children and young people is across different services, so that don't all fall under portfolio of my provision. But what I do oversee is kind of like really, really important. And we kind of have really our services, our young advocates in our 4 major trauma centers, which is really kind of like essential when the young people actually, not just girls, young people across all London are presenting in major trauma centers because they witnessed or they experienced abuse, and they actually sustained the injuries that they end up in a hospital or present in a hospital setting, and they need support. So obviously it's really vital that we work really closely with health professionals, educating them to really understand the impact of abuse on the young people, but then really us supporting them to kind of like crisis management and kind of like identifying how to prevent those risks when they are discharged from the hospitals. The other really fantastic project that I'm overseeing is our supporting trauma awareness and resilience program in accommodation services. So again, it's a kind of that secondary kind of like intervention where our children and young people need to leave their homes because the homes were so unhealthy or unsafe that they actually need to leave into our safe accommodation. And our kind of like, specialist support workers who are delivering this type of work are really supporting with children, young people and moms in their own specific groups, but they're really kind of like trying to support moms to understand the impact of trauma on their own selves, but equally on their children, and how their behaviors literally kind of like communicate what's going on for them, rather than seeing them as problematic or naughty or difficult children to manage, but really trying to understand the impact of trauma on themselves and their children, and then looking into the strategies, how to manage, how to reframe those experiences, looking into, like healthy communication, looking into like self-soothing strategies and more, while equally developing and providing, like these really important activities during the half terms and break times to support strengthening relationships through the fun and having really good time in the communities as well, and reconnecting with the nature and everything what the community has to offer. And then lastly, one of the really, really important kind of like project that I'm overseeing is our early intervention preventative strand of work, which is like one specific, and it's really kind of that primary kind of like force of making and changing the narratives around, root causes of violence against women and girls. Our team is fantastic and kind of like is consisted of very different kind of like models of work. So we have like kind of like proper multi-hub of professionals from different kind of like skill set. So we're kind of like working with our young women who are from a Black and minority background under Courageous Project, where we offer them support through the therapeutic and multi-disadvantaged work and equally community engagement work, which means that they're going to the schools, communities, youth clubs to educate around, violence against women and girls, healthy and healthy relationships. Then we have our generic advocate who really kind of like works with young boys who are already showing unhealthy models of masculinity, potentially seeing as like, perpetrating unhealthy behaviors, but equally with the young girls who potentially are survivors of abuse as well. and kind of like trying to support them to understand the impact and kind of like identify new strategies of behaving. And one of the most important projects is that kind of like early interventions, really going to the schools through our Protect Our Women project. Our facilitator and educator, Marcella, she's phenomenal, and she's delivering the work in our Haringey borough because we're commissioned there to really kind of like work as early as in primary schools with year 3s onwards, and then secondary schools as like a building blocks to really work in regards to understanding healthy and unhealthy relationships, but not just that, understanding feelings, emotions, how we communicate them in a healthy way, how to understand power and control, gender stereotypic roles, identity, and how to kind of like communicate all different, and understanding all these different types of violence against women and girls, like really what do they mean as like in legislation, but that one, how does that really demonstrate in day-to-day life, and supporting children, young people to work together to be challenging each other through the interactive workshops. And equally, when she's embedded in the school, she's like almost like a part of the school community. She's kind of delivering that whole school approach, meaning that she's supporting teachers to kind of like really talk to her about specific cases and identifying referral pathways into our kind of like team, while equally kind of like thinking how we need to work with the parents as well. Because obviously just working with children, young people, yeah, it's great that we're educating them what is healthy, what is not healthy, but they do go home into the communities and to their parents. And it's really important that we're working with the whole community and the whole school system as well. The last 2 years, we actually start developing this kind of like work with young boys as well, which I think it's really, really important because the shift in conversation is slightly changing as well, kind of like looking into and holding perpetrators to account. Again, we don't see our children, young people as a perpetrators, but if we don't intervene right here, right now, there might be the time, if we don't intervene and support them and really understand what's going on for them, they might become perpetrators. So we're kind of really trying to kind of like work with young boys. And the way how we develop our program with young boys is like really not just coming like, oh, that's like what our young boys need to know. Really kind of like working with young boys who had those kind of like challenging models of masculinity or unhealthy models of masculinity as we see it. Kind of like working with them to trying to understand their stories, what they're struggling with, what they would want us to be working around and talking to the boys about. So we really kind of like co-produced a model that we're at the moment piloting in a few of the secondary schools, and we can see the importance and the need for the young boys to have that safe spaces to really unpack what's going on for them and challenge, like the whole pressures of society on the young boys as well, and working together to then start looking into how we can redefine that masculinity in a way that actually is beneficial to all of us.
Thank you very, very much. It seems to me that one of the most pressing questions, if I can ask a couple of questions and then throw it open to the audience, how do we know what works? I mean, all of you have discussed very interesting ideas like challenging young men on their idea of masculinity, but there still seems a very hazy knowledge of what actually constitutes abuse. My daughter was very badly bullied and became school phobic, and one of the remarks that was made to her was that they were very sorry, but any intervention they made might make it worse for her. So she ended up feeling like she was the problem. How do you get round that? Maybe if we start with Sasha, and then I'll just throw it open, and any one of you wants to answer.
I mean, I do think for me the most important is the way how Solace works, right? Really kind of have that trauma-informed lens, the way we're working with the children, young people, right? Trying to kind of work from person-centered approach, because not one size fit all, right? We can't just work with everybody the same way, and kind of really coming from the strength-based practice. So where the good things that are happening in their lives, we're really identifying where the risks are and trying to find the ways with the young people, really them in the driving seat, what works and what doesn't work, to minimize them and kind of trying to psychoeducate. I do think from my perspective, children, young people need to be heard, seen, understood, validated, and we need to just have like a really kind of zero policy tolerance against violence against women and girls on whole board, right? Through the policies, procedures, but equally through the messaging from, the government to the whole leadership into the communities. We all need to speak the same language over and over so that the young people start actually understanding it. Because, the children, young people are not going to do what we tell them. They're going to do what we show them, right? And I do think they're exposed to so many of unhealthy, of not good enough, that's what they're kind of showing us.
Bex and Luke, how do you know what works with sibling peer-to-peer abuse?
Well, it's a good question. Until a couple of years ago, there wasn't really an analysis of what works. There was actually, until a couple of years ago, very little research or evidence base about how to work with sibling sexual harm and abuse. I think we reached the point a couple of years ago of realizing that working with sort of one side of the equation was definitely not the way forwards. We were working with parents and the child who harmed, but we weren't ever really clapping eyes on or working with the child or children who had been harmed. And we knew that that was no longer the right way to work. It felt sort of crazy to kind of split off the family in that way. So we commissioned a literature review and analysis by Dr. Ellie Hansen, which was actually published, I think, just last week, to inform, to draw together the literature that there was and the evidence base that there was as what are the best approaches to identify the needs of different members of the family. And she identified 3 key principles of safety, healing, and justice, and to be guided by those. And then she enumerated in great detail, the common features in families that might create the conditions for sibling sexual harm and how you might sort of begin to address those in any intervention. So we are working in real time, if you like, to implement that analysis by Ellie Hansen. And we are evaluating the pilot project in taking a whole family response to sibling sexual harm and abuse. That's being also evaluated as we go over the next 2 years. We're sort of right at the beginning of that evaluation process.
Thank you. Ellie, somebody once said that the greater the awareness, the less the need for secrecy. But we're now really, really aware of peer-to-peer abuse and the normalization of a rape culture, if you like. What's the next step? I mean, you can keep publishing testimonies and you can keep trying to educate, but what is the problem? That we've got no real consensus on what good sex and relationship education looks like. I mean, right from the beginning, we don't really know which of those courses works well and which doesn't.
Yeah, well, I think continuing to share those stories and experiences is so important. And we always say it's heartbreaking for us that it took 50,000 people sharing their stories for the government or for national news to kind of pick up on it. And sometimes it feels like this real slog when you're working in gender-based violence, that you feel like you're kind of shouting into the abyss all the time, and nobody really seems, outside of the sector, nobody really seems to care or understand what's going on, and how much of an epidemic it really is. I think I would really agree in terms of this idea of there being a one-fits-all approach to sex ed is really enticing and would be great, but it's just non-existent, because every single school and every single part of the UK is going to be completely different in the way that young people engage with that work and what they need, because they have such different needs. So with our education program, every single part of it is bespoke, and that works really well for us. It means that anytime we go into a school, we do a really long consultation with them to understand, okay, what do you already have? What's kind of lacking? What do you need support on? And really understanding the demographics of that school as well. And I think, with draft guidance sometimes that comes out, it's like, well, it has to be this way, and you have to teach it from this age to this age. And actually, I've worked with year 7s that have never even spoken about sex before, and I've worked with year 7s who are in, quite serious relationships. So there's a real discrepancy. You've got to be able to have that, but also I think making it relevant, keeping it young is also really important, because young people need to feel seen in that education, and they need to feel like the adults that are working with them understand what's going on in that digital landscape and truly understand like the stakes for them and what that looks like. And so, all of our team is kind of under the age of 24. And I think that really helps us as well, because there's a connection between the students and our facilitation team.
And how given the size of the demand, what's the gap between what you can do and what's really required?
Well, I mean, structural overhaul would be fabulous. But yeah, I mean, look, we live in a rape culture, as I said at the beginning. This is a massive cultural issue, and a holistic approach is necessary in order for us to challenge this. It can't just be put on the students. It has to be parents, it has to be workplaces, it has to be societal structures. Like, there has to be a complete change in the way that we view it. And as we were talking about earlier, like changing kind of a culture. So something we talk about to schools about is a culture of consent. The fact that it's not only spoken about in PSHE, but this consent is kind of continuously coming up and is embedded into their educational programs. So it's about having proper funding for the sector. It's about having everybody involved in that conversation. You know, I had a big chat with people at a funders the other day about the importance of putting money into getting men to work into the sector more, because so many women work in the sector, which is excellent and they're all fantastic. But actually, I think a part of like seeing that real change is getting men on board and having that kind of 50-50 in the sector. So even looking at kind of how much funding we're putting into employment and kind of encouraging more people to get involved in that conversation. So there's not a quick answer to that. It's like everything. But I think on a small scale in schools, it's about having, you know, enough funding for organizations to come in, enough support for teachers in the school to be able to deliver it, because a lot of the time they're overworked. They, you know, they have other kind of, you know, English teachers are having to take on so much PSHE work on top of everything else, and they're not given the proper resources to be able to do it. So, you know, proper support and money and funding on a structural level is really important.
Thank you. Laura, just to go back to the whole school approach, the young change makers we saw at the beginning were very powerful, and they were speaking very clearly and strongly for themselves. But actually, it takes quite a lot of courage for a young woman or, you know, teenager to come forward and say, I am experiencing this. How do you seek them out, if you like, or how do you give them the courage to come forward?
I mean, I think it's by having those young people being able to step forward helps the younger people to be able to see the opportunities that they can do. And I think, you know, when Jude was working with the girls on the day as well, it wasn't easy for them, actually. They're very worried as well about stepping forward and saying these things, not just because of how it might look here, but they're really constantly worried about what might get online and what might be shown here and how they might be criticized. So it's really hard for them, and they've got to deal with this kind of multifaceted approach and experience of life. But I think that it's about modeling it, isn't it? And having the older students being able to model it to the younger students. And, you know, we're really looking forward to being able to share those videos in the community and share those community with the school. And actually, although the girls were quite nervous to start with, you know, now they've seen them, they feel more confident and they're proud of what they've done. But yeah, I think that it's about having those opportunities when they're in the younger year groups as well. And primary do this really well. Primary are brilliant at creating roles and responsibilities for young people to step into. And when they come to secondary, sometimes schools are quite, you know, they're very big and it becomes overwhelming and focusing on other things. But actually, primary school model works really well for year sevens, helping them to have different roles and responsibilities, having equalities groups, having groups that they can practice being activists in different areas, and then they can seek out what that is they find interesting. We're doing lots of work on oracy as well, because it's not just sometimes having the ideas, it's also being able to have the voice, isn't it? And being able to feel confident that your voice can be heard. So I think there's a huge amount of work that is being done as well, but that needs to continue to be able to be done around oracy for young people, so that they can hear their own voices and so they can feel confident in speaking out and debating and presenting their ideas as well.
What we haven't, sorry, did you want to say something, Luke?
Thank you, well spotted. I just wanted to add, I think sort of echoing some comments by Elliot and Sasa, like thinking about like engaging men, boys, you know, I think in a field where it is predominantly women that work in social care and other aspects of this work, and understandably, I think particularly for sort of violent perpetrators, adults, to expect a woman to go into a room knowing a long history of abuse and violence from a man is too much at times. I found it too much myself as a man. So at times, but But I think, unfortunately, that can also lean towards us not really wanting to deal. And let's be honest, like, we shouldn't be expecting women who are being abused to constantly have to be the ones that engage with support and services. That's not going to change the man or the boy being abusive. So we need to work with the boys. And I do agree that earlier the better. But maybe there's sometimes a bit of a resistance from that, or that just there isn't enough services around understanding that with men. But also at the same time, especially when they're younger, we have to remember that they probably grew up in a violent household or abused themselves. And coming back to Sassa's point, it's you know, it's taking a trauma-informed approach and understanding where that's come from. But I think and as an ex-social worker, I'm very passionate about social workers being in the right position to do a lot of that work if they weren't so overwhelmed with everything else they've got to do. But it's getting that balance of being corrective and saying, that's not okay, we're not tolerating this kind of behaviour, whilst also holding in mind that, you know, they've grown up in a violent household, or they've experienced what they've experienced, and so it's kind of normative for them. Because they can, but I think, you know, from my experience, a lot of men don't want to engage with social care because they think they're monsters. They think that's how everybody's perceiving them, so they're not going to step through the door. When I had a dad say to me once, "You think I'm a monster?" I was like, "I've never said that to you. Where did that come from?" I think that's what he thought about himself. And there's so much shame and guilt that you've got to try and work through first. And it's, you know, so it's a hard piece of work, but it's something we need to do. And it's just because I feel so frustrated that all services lean towards working with women, and that's never going to change the work that needs doing with the men.
Well, I did a story once about a nursery that when the Sheffield Steelworks closed down, they employed 50% males who had been steelworkers. And the shock and horror of quite a lot of people in Sheffield that men weren't being allowed to go anywhere near children. But they'd actually devised a whole series of safeguards, and it really transformed people's attitudes to how men could get involved in, you know, in care. It's sometimes it only needs a small thing to act as a catalyst, because I do feel like I mean, I've done a couple of pieces on men who are very serious domestic abusers, and it's almost like they're operating in silence. I mean, nobody's having a discussion about it. Nobody shows how different and varied and you know, how many of them started very young, which is what we're discussing today. So how do we need more innovation in seeking out those young boys, if you like, who are perhaps more prone to becoming abusers? Any one of you?
I'd love to jump in here, because I think one thing that we are kind of scared to address, and I'd like to kind of echo those comments, that's really important, is there's a lot of fear sometimes around working with young people who are displaying harmful sexual behavior. And I actually think that it's probably like one of the most important things that we can do in school is being able to identify those students that need that help and support, so that they don't display more harmful behaviors longer down the line, that we don't just dismiss it or punish it, but that we really focus on rehabilitation. And, you know, an example of an amazing website is made by the Lucy Faithfull Foundation called Shore. And it's essentially a website, a resource for young people who are worried about their own behaviors, to go and seek support of how they can change or how they can unlearn some of those behaviors. So I think, you know, having a standardized prevention model that's kind of rolled out. I'm not sure who said it, but somebody said something about how difficult it is that every single kind of district or authority has a different approach to educational or relationships and sex education. And what we need is actually a unified approach. And I think with prevention as well, you know, every single council and district does prevention intervention in a completely different way. Whereas if we had one set kind of intervention that really helped those young men or young women who are showing those behaviors at a young age, and we can intervene so that it doesn't escalate, I think that's where we should kind of be focusing a lot of that preventative work on.
I think the area that we haven't discussed is the whole issue of social media and the impact of pornography. It's sometimes a feeling of kind of, impotence, really. I mean, is there something that can be, what can be done collaboratively to tackle this? Should you know, tech industry be held to account far more? I mean, how do we encourage young people to understand the toxicity, really, of social media at times? Who would like to step in?
I mean, to me, again, you know, I'm gonna come to that kind of like, you know, early intervention, prevention, really educating, you know, people on all levels, right? Because, you know, I'm a parent myself, right? And I'm working in a sector, and I can just really quickly see how much, you know, young people being exposed to, you know, YouTube and all these things that they don't know what they're watching. It really changes the way they think, the way they function. And I'm mindful, and I'm constantly, you know, challenging them and talking to them about it, so they kind of like are quite mindful what we watch, what we not watch, and having conversation around them. But I am aware that potentially lots of parents don't have that skills and knowledge and understanding. And, you know, literally technology is becoming like almost like a, you know, like a safe space for the children to be on, right? Because it's safer to be at home, at least I know they're at home watching something, than actually being out in the community, because the community is equally unsafe. So it's like, you know, really kind of like talking from all that on all different levels, and having this whole community approach, not just all school approach anymore, but whole community approach. You know, like Ellie was saying, like really a lot of commitment towards resources and funding for the services, and not just one specific services, but actually combination of all services that really need to work together. Our leaders, our faith leaders, our businesses, our sports arenas, all these people need to work together collaboratively, you know, because that's like where actually man dominance is quite strong, right? And really kind of need to start having that conversations on all levels, to start unpacking what's happening and redefining the roles within the society, so that our young boys and young girls are going to be all free from expectations of what is today to be a young boy or a young girl, because it's like so much pressure from everywhere. And again, like, you know, taking and making technology and tech companies really accountable about the content that they're developing, right? Young people are now using so much of really, really, you know, disturbing content, playing the games like hours in. That's gonna rewire the brains. But again, if people don't understand that, then of course, yeah, it's safer. My child is at home, at least he is safe, rather than being out in the community potentially being stabbed, right? So yeah, education and lots of resources, and really working together through all these different layers, to me, is number one priority.
Lucy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it kind of follows on from what Sasa was just saying around. I think the biggest thing for me is that it's about, just in recent years, it feels like there's so much more isolation within young people than there ever was before. So in terms of, and I know it can always be the go-to to blame it on funding cuts and all these sorts of things, but I just feel like the opportunities that young people have to come together in a space that feels safe and supportive and is appropriately monitored and is appropriately safeguarded are just incredibly limited, and that it's become much more the norm to sort of seek out relationships and seek out connection online. And, you know, with the rise of, you know, figures like Andrew Tate and things like this, it's I think particularly young boys, but I imagine in some areas young girls as well, are finding community and finding comfort in their isolation by meeting other young men online that are thinking very similar things. And I think our access to social media, our increased access to news and coverage, the world seems a scarier place now than I feel like it probably did 10, 20 years ago, probably just through increased coverage. And so therefore sort of a desire for belonging, a desire for sort of safety can often kind of create these very like binary, these like, you know, the people see the world in black and white in a way that they probably, it just didn't feel like they did before. So I think any attempts that can be made to try and find commonality between young people and not differences, I think in whatever way that can be possible, through schools, through clubs, through you know, through parents taking action around, you know, devices and social media use, I think anything like that would be brilliant to kind of help young people contextualize their own safety and contextualize you know, what is right and what is wrong and what is safe and what is not through real life experiences, rather than just reading online.
I think that's very, very true. One of the somebody's just posted a rather tragic question. My son, who is 8, disclosed assault by penetration by a class peer aged 9. School's response has been awful. They didn't even ask my son to come and speak to them. He did not want to return to school with the other boy present. The school did nothing. We have been left as a result. What should the school's response have been? Perhaps Laura?
I think that it's so sad to read that, because what we want to do with young people is when they come forward and are brave enough, finally, after something really traumatic has happened, to tell somebody, the worst thing that you can then do is say that you can't do anything about it, because it's completely disempowering, isn't it? And I think that one of the things we've talked about a lot on here is that you can't do things in isolation. And lots of the initiatives that have been put into schools over the last few years that I've definitely benefited from a safeguarding lead, is having a safer schools officer in school, having a social worker in school. And actually the social worker in schools project has been absolutely amazing. And the funding for Haringey, I think it's part of the difficulties in funding that long term has been really difficult. And that's been a real shame, because the social workers in schools are there again to offer their expertise. And I think that the social workers can bring such expertise to the conversations. I think that when something like that happens, it's not also about one person making the decision, and that the child should be part of that decision and working out what they need to feel safe. So we work really closely with our police, our social safer schools officer and the police, and with the families, and try to get to a point where we can do what the child wants. The child must have agency. And I think that's the most important thing. They get to decide, not the school. The school doesn't decide what happens next. There are powers in place so that things can be reported to the police, so that if young people do want to do that, they can, so that we can think about how we can work with families and young people so that a child doesn't feel excluded for coming forward and being really brave and saying something, horrendous has happened to me. But it's a need for a multi-agency approach, I think, always with these things, so that you're drawing on the expertise of the people around you that can help you to make sure that young people feel safe all times.
Thank you. Did anybody else like to say anything? No? I think one of the strongest issues seems to be we need a sort of a kind of manifesto for change. I mean, this is, you're all doing absolutely excellent work in your respective fields, but how do you bring this together? The government has said it wants to halve violence against women and girls in 10 years. And maybe it's a cynic of me, but good luck with that, because unless you actually do have targets, which you seem to be very fond of at the minute, but you do need targets. You need to be able to measure what's happening. You need to have a consensus. I mean, how does that come about? You've all talked about collaboration, but how does that actually come about?
Well, I would say from our perspective as a charity and as an activist organisation, we do lots of advocacy work with lots of other charities, and sometimes there does feel like there's a lot of red tape. But there is so much strength in kind of those working groups forming together and working with people to help us kind of lobby the government for that funding and to show them, the results. But at the end of the day, it's really challenging, because there isn't, I know we've spoken about funding, but there really isn't a lot. But I was on a round table, last week, and they said, how can we do this with no money? So we want you to imagine like getting rid of violence against women and girls, but you have no funding. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, that's what people in the sector are asked to do and to figure out. But I think keeping those working groups going, platforming the voices of young people and survivors is so imperative for making change, sharing those stories, and yeah, just to be confident and to, I can say from our perspective, being in schools, that young people are really engaged, and we should give them so much more credit than they do get. And they will be that change of that next generation going up and hopefully working in those structures and systems. So it's just a journey of keeping on pushing, I would say.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very good optimistic note to end on. Can I thank the panel, Sasha, Lucy, Ellie, Jude, Laura, Bex, and Luke. And there'll be a resources pack sent out to everybody who signed up from the webinar. And I really, really look forward to getting this manifesto going and having a very strong collaborative effort, because I mean, I'm completely in admiration because I can see what's possible if you do have the money, if you do have the resources, you know, and if you do have that combined strength. So thank you very much indeed for taking part this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really, really interesting. Thank you.
So much.